John, Sam Hinkie bumped you yesterday. We missed you yesterday because you got hinkied.
Well, Sam's always a thorn in my side. It's understandable. No,
I wanted to get your opinion. I wanted to get, as a writer, number one, and a guy who covered the NBA for a long time, I wanted to get your opinion not on Hinkie and him leaving, but on his writing.
Well, I mean, that letter was over the top. If that doesn't give you a window into Sam Hinkie's personality, I don't know what does. A lot of the issues that, at the end of the day, to me, Josh Harris still didn't want to fire him. Now, granted, they wanted to take away his power, but that was already taken away once Jerry Colangelo was in. So the fact that he has some strengths, and those strengths I think Josh Harris recognized, and that was on the analytical aspect of the game, wanted to make him sort of a glorified director of analytics. But at the end of the day, I think that's the strength. I think that's what he should be in this league. It's all the other things we've always talked about that always came to the forefront, and the fact that he wasn't very good with dealing with people. And there's numerous sources. People can believe whatever they want. The sources all over the place. Agents didn't want to deal with this guy. The Sixers finally realized it, and they started to want to have this branch in the front office of one guy to handle the analytics and one guy to handle sort of the glad-handing and dealing with all these people. And that's part of the job he had. Never recognized his failings, didn't want to change, didn't want to look in the mirror. And when you talk about a 13-page, and I joke when people call it a manifesto because we know what that means, but it was the deranged ramblings of a nut job. It really was. It's just the difference was the stakes, and obviously professional sports in the grand scheme of things is not that important. So it doesn't matter that Sam Hinkie thought this way, but he sort of showed himself, and he wants to be the smartest guy in the room. He's trying too hard to be the smartest guy in the room. And just because you talk about Warren Buffett and Jeff Bezos and everybody else doesn't mean you're them. And you have to recognize your own shortcomings. And I think he didn't do that.
Look, whether you agreed with Hinkie or not, I thought Jeff Van Gundy brought up an interesting point. And he said, this isn't just a Sam Hinkie plan. You don't get to do whatever you want as general manager. This was a collaborative plan that was co-signed by whoever in ownership has that ability to do that. I hate when people say it's Sam Hinkie coming up with this. Yeah, he had some ideas, but they all had to be approved. And I think the feeling is that Sam Hinkie came in here and sabotaged this organization, but this is what the Sixers wanted. And the ownership group bailed on him. They turned their back on what they agreed upon. Is that not true?
Well, I will say this. I agree with what Jeff said 100% in the fact that if you think this was a bad plan and if you want somebody to blame, who's ultimately the blame isn't Sam Hinkie, it's Josh Harris, because Josh Harris allowed him to do what he did. So that part of it, wholeheartedly agree with. And again, I point to Josh Harris still didn't want to get rid of him. So I think that speaks to some failings, certainly in the ownership of this organization. Some people who like it would think the opposite.
Well, John, I don't know if you read – did you read the Adrian Wojnarowski piece?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And I didn't think it was very professional if Jerry Colangelo leaked that letter. By no means will I say that. I think it was very effective, but I don't think it was professional. I didn't think you had to embarrass a guy like that on his way out the door.
Well, not only that, John, the column from Wojo, who, as you said many times, you've covered the NBA. He's probably the most respected NBA guy there is. He essentially says that everybody in the organization was on Hinkie's side, and they were trying to make him aware of Colangelo basically snake oiled him from the backside, trying to push him out, and the minority owners were trying to let Hinkie know because they were on Hinkie's side, and that essentially Scott O'Neill was kind of trying to talk Colangelo's kid into taking this job. His kid didn't even want the job.
No, he didn't, and for the reason that everyone says, the nepotism aspect, which by definition it is. Nobody's trying to defend that. As far as nobody knows how to work the system better than Jerry Colangelo, and yeah, he blew the guy up because he wanted to, because he could. But for those who look at it, remember, if you don't have the ammunition, you can't do that. If Sam Hinkie doesn't write that letter, Jerry Colangelo can't do what he did. So at the end of the day, he still has to take some responsibility for handling business the way he does it, speaking of Hinkie. Now, going back to the original thought, the fact that the Sixers organization pulled the plug on Sam Hinkie, there's no doubt they did. But if Sam Hinkie thought this could go on, and you and I have discussed this a lot for years and years and years, even if they said that to him, even if they said, look, we're fine for this, if this goes on for 7 or 8 years, for him to believe that is the height of naivete. It really is. It's extremely naive. He has to realize that at some point when the NBA commissioner steps in and forces the organization's hands, there's an issue here.
Well, that was part of the letter. That was part of the letter, John, him saying we shouldn't care what any outside forces think about what we're doing. That was part of what Sam was saying. We shouldn't.
I understand.
Zig when they zag. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But here's the problem, and what I've always tried to get across to people. And from day one, this is not done in a vacuum. It's easy to say that. It's easy to say we can't worry about outside influences. You're a part of the NBA community. That's an outside influence you have to deal with, whether you like it or not. And that's where the naive part comes into it. It's easy to say, look, we shouldn't care what the commissioner of the NBA thinks or what the other owners think and the pressure they want to put on the commissioner and say, screw it. We don't have to deal with these people. But you do have to deal with these people. And that's the other arm of it, is the fact that he did not recognize that to be a success in the job that he had to embrace these people. He had to deal with them. He had to, at the bare minimum, have a good working relationship with them. And he did not recognize that to the bitter end.
Yeah. Now, let me ask this question. Now, you and I have gone back and forth. Do you look any differently at Colangelo now?
No, I as I said, it's not. I think he didn't have to do what he did. He didn't have to embarrass the guy out the door. And this is saying if he leaked the letter, and I agree with you. I don't think anybody's more plugged in this league than Woj, so I believe that he did. So while I'm saying that, I thought it was very unprofessional. But at the end of the day, it's also just an example of how indoctrinated this guy is in this league. He knows the ins and outs. He knows how to play everybody in everything. So in a way, it's a strength. I don't think it's nice by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it speaks to one guy being a heavyweight in the basketball industry and the other guy being a lightweight with no experience whatsoever. There's so many correlations between Chip Kelly and Sam Hinkie. Chip with the Eagles, obviously. It's frightening because both guys seized power. They said, it's my way or the highway. We have to do it this way. There's no other way. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. And they didn't know how to work the system. So we can all say that experience doesn't mean anything, or it shouldn't mean anything, or Jerry Colangelo is a part of the old boys club. However you want to spin it, he knows how to work the NBA, and that's a positive for the Philadelphia 76ers.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, there's a lot of people who really respect Colangelo, and we're not here to discuss his resume. It's certainly better than Sam Hinkie's resume. I don't think there's any argument there. I do find it kind of interesting. You know, the guy's been in the league since 1968, hasn't won one NBA championship, and the man can walk on water for all intents and purposes. I find that to be a little ridiculous. Not to mention the USA basketball that everybody throws out there. If the United States doesn't win a gold medal, I think we're shocked. You know, to me, winning the gold medal for USA basketball, that's not pushing my pile all that much. You should win the gold medal at USA basketball. And then hearing this story of how it all kind of went down, I scratch my head and say to myself, a 76-year-old man came in here and basically jumped into a situation that's going to be handed right to him. Hey, here you go. Have 4 first-round picks and possibly 2 lottery picks entering your roster, fall right into your lap, and take all the acclaim for it, fine, and then hand it over to your son. I have a little bit of a problem with the way this went down. Regardless of whether you like Hinkie, don't like Hinkie, or what, it doesn't sit well with me.
Well, he's a smart guy, and that's where it comes. Hey, is he working the system? You're damn right he's working the system. Is he walking into a good situation as far as assets that Sam Hinkie set up? Yeah, you're damn right he is. Is he going to get the credit if this thing turns around? Yeah, he is. And that's part of the aspect of it that I think people will look on in the future. And if it turns out to be sort of in Ed Wade with the Phillies situation, who kind of rebuilt that organization, and Pat Gillick came in and swooped in and got all the credit, I think everybody ends up happy, and that's not an issue. Will Sam deserve credit? I think he already's gotten credit from plenty of people for certain aspects of the job. It's the other aspects that we've talked about ad nauseum that he wasn't very good at. And I think if he stays in this league as a director of analytics, I think he'll have a long and successful career. I just don't think he has the makeup of an NBA general manager. I think he doesn't realize certain parts of the job he just flat out ignored.
Oh, and look, I think Howie Roseman. I think he was in a situation where, the first time around he wasn't great at his job. He sat out of the game and learned. I think he certainly will learn. Hinkie will probably have to learn, and he made mistakes. I don't think anybody can avoid that. By the way, I would guarantee you, if I was in the sport for 48 years, I would have won a championship, John. I'm just throwing that out there.
Well,
you put me at something for 48 years, I'm going to win.
It's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, but as I say, it's we talk about it all the time. I do not, by any stretch of the imagination, think the Sixers are all of a sudden going to turn it on and become this tremendous organization because Sam Hinkie's there. Now, if you ask me, you're talking about a guy who's in the Hall of Fame. You're talking about a guy who's a 4-time executive of the year. His son, for everyone criticizing him, he's won it twice. They got 6 between them as far as executive of the years. That's voted on by your peers. That directly shows you toward respect in this game. It really is. You can't compare the resumes. You can argue that Jerry Colangelo.
By the way, I don't want to take. I don't want to take anything away from his resume either. He certainly has a lot of credibility, as you mentioned, and a lot of power and pull. But as the story kind of went, as Wojo kind of insinuated, the old school basketball pushed out the new guy.
Yeah, and it's not a surprise because it's experience, and it's not necessarily that his ideas are better. It's just that he knows how to work the system, and that's part of it, and that's a big part of it. Now, you mentioned the fact he's 76 years old. That's an issue. I have a big problem with that because this is a guy who's not going to be here long.
Not to mention working from halfway across the country.
Yeah, and this organization, we've just been through 3 years of the worst basketball in NBA history. So, I mean,
I've enjoyed it.
Something has to change as far as the branding. But, you know how much I've criticized Sam Hinkie for months and years. The biggest embarrassment of his entire tenure was him walking out the door in that 13-page letter. Because that, first of all, the passive aggressiveness towards Scott O'Neal, who has never had anything but Sam Hinkie's back in public, and I've criticized him for it. the fact that he went, I think, through 13 pages before he got to a thank you to Josh Harris, who, by the way, still didn't want to fire him, I think it speaks to his personality.
Well,
I think
the letter kind of reads.
now is,
The letter kind of reads to me, John. Here's where we were. Here's what I got you, and you want me to work for this guy's kid? Go, go bleep yourself.
well, I agree with that. But where is hey, you don't like Jerry Colangelo because he's taken your job. That's perfectly understandable. That's human nature. And especially it's even probably worse today because if he leaked the letter, as we all assume, it's even worse. I have no issue with Sam Hinkie having a problem with Jerry Colangelo. I have a big problem with him having issues with people like Scott O'Neill and Josh Harris, who gave him this opportunity. And as I said, to the very end, they didn't want to fire him. They weren't going to fire him.
Maybe Josh Harris. Maybe Josh Harris didn't want to fire him, but it seemed like O'Neill was working around the back channels to go convince Brian Colangelo.
Well, I don't necessarily dispute that because Scott's working for the organization. Jerry's in control of the basketball operations, and he wanted to recuse himself from the interview process because he didn't want to be the one who decided on his son over Danny Ferry. That part of it, I don't think that's going back channels. I think that's just he took orders from the head of basketball operations, and that's Colangelo. Now it's not Sam Hinkie. For the years that Scott O'Neill and Sam Hinkie were here, and you've probably interviewed Scott time after time after time, whether it was Larry Brown criticizing Sam Hinkie, whether it was Charles Barkley, all these basketball heavyweights who are in the Hall of Fame just destroying Sam Hinkie. It was Scott O'Neill who went out and was the point man to defend him. And I criticized him for it a lot because I thought it was absurd. And still, you have to have some loyalty to that. That is my biggest issue with Sam Hinkie in that letter. And as I said, he didn't get to the thank you until the end of basically War and Peace. And that, if I were Josh Harris, I had to, you know me, Mike. I had to read every single word of it for my job. I read it. If I was Josh Harris, I would have got the page 2 on that. I would have thrown it out, and I would have been so peeved off at that particular moment for the opportunity I gave this guy. And for a lack of a better word, he excremented on me. That's what he did.
Well, if he would have got to the bottom of that letter, he would see what's walking out the door, which is a pretty smart guy. John, I do want to ask you real fast, we're real brief here. Kansas City Radio called me today to comment on this Peterson story. Is it a story at all? No, not a story at all. As far as the conspiracy aspect, I'm not going to delve into people's personal lives. But as far as the conspiracy aspect that people are trying to play up and the fact that it's well known in the NFL circles, I think I'm pretty plugged in. I never heard it before. I talked to numerous people in Kansas City today. I talked to people in Philadelphia. They never heard of it. So it certainly wasn't well known. And for anyone to kind of spin it as Andy Reid trying to get rid of Doug Peterson, come on, the guy's been around Andy Reid since 1999. That's just it's as I wrote on Twitter, it's much ado about nothing. All right. John McMullen has more on the draft process and some local guys who are coming in. Check it out at 973ESPN.com at JF McMullen. All right. Have a good weekend.
Hey, you too. Thanks, Mike.